Hi, today I'm with Morley Robbins, who is actually the developer of the root cause protocol. The root cause protocol was developed by Morley, who transformed a career in the mainstream medical industry into a quest to learn the fundamental components of a healthy metabolism. The RCP is the culmination of his many years of research and is revolutionary in its approach to health from a truly holistic perspective by looking at the whole organism and how all the elements work together, rather than limiting the focus to isolated nutrients or conditions. And so much more, too. Are you looking for answers, searching for natural ways to support your body, or frustrated with mainstream solutions? So are we. Welcome to the Renewed Hope Wellness Podcast, where we're on a search for answers. We're going off the beaten path and diving into natural solutions to health and wellness issues. Our goal, empower you to be your own health advocate. So let's get started. I'm so excited to have you here and can't wait for our audience to dive into what I started a process or journey in several months ago. Training in the RCP as a consultant has been probably one of the most profound educational tools that I've ever experienced. And I do not say that lightly because I have certifications in all kinds of things, spent an embarrassing amount of money on programs. Came to 2 weeks into yours and thought, I have learned more in 2 weeks about human biology and biochemistry and how iron and copper are so important than I learned in 8 years of education. So
Wow.
it also, as you and I talked off air, it messed with me a little bit because it meant that I had to rethink a lot of the things that I had been trained to do. And I was very comfortable with those things. And there's a real danger when we get really comfortable in what we know.
Right.
So for me, it was an unlearning process. Definitely had
Right.
to
Right.
push back on some things. There were some definitely issues where I thought, no, wait, this doesn't make any sense. It ended up making perfect sense. Now probably the only thing that makes sense in a lot of ways, but it was definitely new information, and I think the audience today is going to find why I came to that conclusion and how it's literally changed a lot of the ways that I approach caring for people.
Well, I think the key is, can we turn that process into an aerosol can and just spray it on people so they can go through that process? I mean, it's really, make sure you credit yourself for the courage to step out of your training and rethink it. It's not easy to do that. I mean, it really is. I'm not extending false praise. I think it's a profound shift that needs to take place to really understand what's going on, and that's not easily done. It really isn't.
No, and especially when some of it means that you have done some things wrong. You know that we vitamin D supplementation, so many things that we can talk about that honestly is being promoted more and more, surprisingly so, with these high doses of vitamin D that I just cringe now. I never was part of the high dose vitamin D movement. I always
Right.
felt like there's a cost with everything, and that was there. But now that I understand so much more about retinol and the shared receptor with vitamin D, what are we doing? What are we really doing? So
Yeah. No, it's very, very true. And it's just getting more and more people to be aware of it. And that's what conversations like this are all about, is trying to stimulate people's neurons, get them
yeah,
to say, wait a minute, is there more to the story? And in fact, there is. That's the key. So
absolutely. Well, how did you come to develop the root cause protocol? A little bit of your story, Morley.
I came kicking and screaming. Uh, no, I'm sure people have heard the story. I was born into a very sickly family. I was supposed to be a doctor. My older sister, became a nurse, a very good one at that. And I went to college, and oh my gosh, it's not easy to become a doctor. I'll tell you that. And I wasn't I wasn't academically inclined. wasn't what's really fascinating about this later life experience is that I've become a scholar in my 60s and 70s. I wasn't there when I was in my 20s. I had no patience or aptitude or passion for learning. But all that's changed. But I think the real culmination was I developed a frozen shoulder from pulling a suitcase behind my back for 20 years as a consultant. And I couldn't pick my hand up above my waist. It was very painful. I couldn't sleep. Went to a health food store. Long story short, they told me to go see Dr. Liz. I resisted. I fought that. Went back months later. They said, "We love you. Go see Dr. Liz." And I think many people now know that Dr. Liz is my wife. And it was a transformational experience. But she introduced me to a phrase I'd never heard in 32 years of working in mainstream conventional medicine, which was the innate healer. I thought, as she introduced that, after she had released the tension by going into my mouth, which was a miracle, I stood there and looked at her and thought to myself, if there's an innate healer, I want to find out who that is. And it was almost like a contract that we had. She was going to say the phrase that was going to turn me on. And I've been a heat seeking missile for 16 years now to understand what's the mechanism for homeostasis in mammalian physiology. It's not just humans. And once you learn to ask the right questions, it's amazing what you learn. But you got to ask the right questions, and you have to challenge the Google search engines and the AI dweebs out there. And the information is out there, but it takes a certain level of persistence and patience. And persistence is, oh my gosh, the things I've learned. And like we were sharing before we started this, I've come across a new protein, which we'll probably talk about later, that has transformational implications for people's chronic disease. And it's a new peptide I'd never heard of, but it's the most prevalent protein in the blood. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so it's just, it's one mind-boggling discovery after another. But I think what has evolved over the last 15 years is this devotion to discovering how does the body really work, and then turning it into a course so that people can learn. Having the opportunity to chat through conversations like this with hundreds of different podcasters. It's actually over 100 podcasters now, but it's, I think, 350 interviews out there. And it's just the blessing of people wanting to hear this message. And we just keep chipping away at it. And we're certainly not a household term yet, but I think more and more people are aware of it. And I was recently in Louisiana with Dr. Liz. We were at a Easter celebration, but also a family reunion for her. And we had an opportunity to meet with one of my clients who was in the area. And she has several conditions that warrant specialists. And these are hematologists and oncologists. And she met with these two doctors in New Orleans, and they gave her the lowdown of what they saw. And she said, well, I don't believe a word of what you said. I'm having a consult with Morley Robbins tomorrow. and both doctors independently said, you know Morley Robbins? You must have a very special situation for him to get involved in that case. And we chuckled about that. But it's like, I would never have thought that clinicians at that level, these are not your average practitioner, they would even know who I was, much less respond with that kind of zeal. So it's been a lot of fun to stir the pot and get people to think differently about what's really going on.
Right. Well, how do you, so if you were to try to explain, I think one of the things that I've really appreciated in your program is the Ferris wheel concept and
Right, right.
how that really kind of helps. For me, it was like a really good base understanding of how we work and what we're actually doing as practitioners is taking care of the seats, the symptoms, the things that people are coming to that we're trying to address. And yet at the heart of that, we work completely opposite of everything that you see on the seats. A lot of times it's the problem is within that whole mechanism of that. So um, you will do a better job explaining that than I do, but it's a really, I think it's just a great visual and it helps people understand that that's what we've been doing for years. Even in natural health practitioner offices,
Sure.
there's still this concept that we're going to be able to out supplement a condition, or in
Mhm.
allopathic care, you're going to be able to have a pill for every ill. And it's this concept that we're going to have one thing that can fix a very complex system. And it's not working. I don't think it's ever worked well. I think people do have some improvements and things like that, but to actually heal the cell, that's going to take this kind of conversation, honestly.
Absolutely. Um, Having spent so many years in allopathic medicine, and one of the areas that I really focused on was helping organizations anticipate growth and volume. And how are we going to respond clinically, but what kind of physical infrastructure do we need? How do we mobilize the resources to be able to serve this growing demand? And I think I reached a crescendo. It was in 2008, and I was working in a firm based here in Durham, North Carolina, for three clients in North Carolina, and it was trying to anticipate what the demand for healthcare was going to be in 2025, which is exactly where we are. And it was a scary moment because every chronic disease, as we gathered the data, was a hockey stick that was going to take off over the next 2 decades or next 15 years or so. And it was, I was just stunned. I'm like, what is going on? And I realized in that moment, I said, I can't stay on the sidelines anymore. So I went out and got a certificate in um, coaching and took some other courses to begin to learn. I didn't know what I was doing. I realized I couldn't just passively sit on the sidelines and say, wow, it's going to really get bad and chronic disease is really going to grow. And gosh, what I was like, there's got to be something that we're doing that we can do to intervene. And when I had the experience with Dr. Liz, and it was so transformational because doctors wanted to operate. I knew that wasn't the answer. And she really healed my shoulder by releasing the pressure in the pterygoid muscle, which is up in your jaw, a little tiny muscle. That little tiny muscle controls the shoulder joint. It's like only a chiropractor would know that, right? They're really smart. They're very well trained. They know the anatomy of the body, I think, better than any practitioner on the planet. I mean, they really, because they know the nervous system, they know the musculature, they know the skeletal system, unlike any other practitioner. And of course, I was very dismissive. These are witch doctors. And then she transformed my shoulder into a usable part of my anatomy. But I realized I had to step off the Ferris wheel or the merry-go-round of medicine, and I became her girl Friday. I was checking people in and out of her practice. That's what I mean. I went from being this uh, hoity-toity consultant, I just realized I had to change my life. And it was a momentous decision to do that. I mean, I was in free fall. I had no idea what I was doing. Like, people think like there was some um, game plan. I'll do this and then do this and do that. It's like, no, it's just I like people know my Facebook picture. It's me jumping out of an airplane, right? What people have to look carefully at is the guy jumping out of the airplane has three arms. And so I take calculated risks. There was a guy strapped to my back.
Right.
And what was really comical about that jump was as we were flying up to 3 miles high, uh, he's like, "You're going to pull the ripcord, right?" I said, "Yeah, don't worry." He said if I tap you on your shoulder, it's time to pull the ripcord. I said, yeah, I get it. He said, if I tap you on the altimeter, you've got to pull the ripcord because it's really serious. I said, look, relax. I'm going to pull the ripcord. So we waddled up to the door. And I don't know whether you've ever done this, but when you jump out of a plane, the name of the website was perfectlygoodairplane.com. Why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane? But when you do that, it is an adrenaline rush like you've never experienced. And we're coming down at 180 feet per second. And I'm watching this postage stamp get really big. And I feel this tap on my shoulder. I didn't do anything. And I feel the tap on the altimeter. I didn't do anything. And then I felt him have to come around. And he pulled the ripcord. And so we come down, pinpoint landing. And we finally landed. He said, I thought you were going to pull the ripcord. I said, are you kidding? I said, it was too much fun. I couldn't. But the thing was, that jump cleared the cobwebs. I'd had all sorts of scotomas and I was confused. And that in that moment, and it only lasted a few minutes to come, you come down 3 miles pretty fast. I realized I had to change my whole orientation. So I became the Girl Friday, started to do the research, and one of Dr. Liz's clients said, I think you need to start writing about what you're learning. She said, and I think you need to use paradoxical intent. I said, what are you talking about? She said, reverse psychology. So I started writing a series of articles about um, let's get fat. That was the first book I wrote. It's just this cute little book. It's only that big, but it was a 10-step plan on how to get fat. And I sold it for $5, and people just loved it. It was designed to be humorous, but it was designed to be instructive too. And then I wrote one that was called "Let's Break Bones." I wanted people to know exactly how to break a femur or your hip or whatever. And I was just using the research against them. And then the one that really triggered a lot of change was let's make a heart attack. Don't have a heart attack, go on the offense. 10-step plan. 7 of the 10 steps came from the American Heart Association. They were telling people what to do to, quote, prevent a heart attack. I was able to prove in the literature that those 7 steps were going to cause a heart attack. But step number 8 was eliminate magnesium from your body. And when I wrote this article, and one of Dr. Liz's clients was a practitioner. I said, could you read this and see what you think of it? And she came back over the weekend. She came back and she said, this is very funny. This is very good. She says, very uncomfortable about how accurate it is. She said, but I can't help but think that step number 8 isn't more important than you think. And that was eliminate magnesium. And I said, yeah, maybe you're right. And so that led me to Carolyn Dean's book on the magnesium miracle. And that's what started the whole process. I was never the same after reading that book. And then I had the great fortune of meeting Carolyn. She was very excited to take me under her wing and really nurture my um, ability to share this message with her. And that's what got me started. That's what put the bit in my mouth. And it took me probably 5 years to get from magnesium deficiency to get to increased oxidative stress caused by too much iron, and then find out why the iron was building was from a lack of bioavailable copper. And again, it was an extended process of connecting all these different dots. But there was a very important article I read about halfway into that journey. It was by an Italian team of researchers that were specializing in iron metabolism. And they made the comment that there's no greater stress on planet Earth than iron stress. And it was like this ton of bricks came down. And I went, oh my gosh. Oh, because we raised that everyone's anemic, right? We,
Mm-hmm.
we, all, we all need more iron. When in fact, the iron needs to be recycled, as we talk about in the class, and no one knows about that. No one knows this foundational physiological process of recycling iron. And then what you have to do is take the next step and get to why is iron not circulating? Why is iron not recycling? Why is iron out of regulation? And it's then you suddenly realize, oh, well, copper is the general and iron is the foot soldier. And we've been trained to believe in the foot soldier and not understand that there's generals in charge. And generals all have stars on their shoulders. And what are they made of? Brass. What's brass made of? 88% copper. And the whole model of conventional medicine is based on our kitchen, and all kitchens have a stove, right? What's the stove made out of? Iron. And the spotlight is on the stove. And the fact of the matter is, the stove does not know what's for dinner. The stove does not know how to turn the burner on or what temperature to put it on. What's the temperature for the oven? And the conventional model completely ignores the chef. There's no concept of the chef. And when you get into the mitochondria, as we do in the class, we're talking about water wheels versus Ferris wheels. Well, what allows it to be a water wheel, you can't release energy if you can't turn oxygen into water, two molecules of water. And the stove inside the mitochondria at complex 4, cytochrome C oxidase. And that stove is two heme groups, heme A and heme A3, and they hold oxygen so that copper can slice and dice it and turn it into two molecules of water. And that's what releases the energy, because you have to have the perfect pH, which copper delivers. And suddenly we have a process that produces water, creates the water wheel. And if that process doesn't go smoothly, as it often doesn't, then iron starts to build up inside the mitochondria. And then it becomes the Ferris wheel. And it was just this, it was actually Gunther Weiss is a famous Australian hematologist. And he wrote an article about a ride on the Ferris wheel. And he talked about this very mechanism. And so I just, I will always defer to this wisdom that he has. I would say he's probably one of the brightest hematologists on the planet. But it was like this light bulb moment. I went, oh my gosh, Ferris wheel. And then the idea of the seats, treating the perimeter of the problem. And that's how the money's made. Because you spell seats, $EAT, $. And that's how practitioners make their living, is ignoring the chaos in the center of the mitochondria and treating the periphery of the problem, which are all the symptoms that evolve from low energy, high oxidative stress, and metabolic pathways that are blowing up left and right. And that's not taught anywhere that I'm aware of. It's not taught outside of the RCP Institute. So I think it's a pretty simple model for people to embrace. I think the challenge and what I admire about what you've done is you've overcome the natural resistance to it because of your training. You knew what you knew, but you didn't know what you didn't know. And
Right.
it's a strong individual who's willing to expose themselves, immerse themselves in knowledge that they didn't know about, even though it's eviscerating their belief system, their knowledge base, their livelihood. You were jumping out of an airplane, but you didn't know. And the RCP is kind of the tandem jumper with you. Once you realize that there's a lot of research out there that verifies and documents and codifies this truth that isn't taught, you're like, okay, so then I have to think differently about it. And so that's where we hopefully get people in the course of 16 weeks is move them from this state of training to a state of enlightenment. And the phrase that I love most of all from Einstein is anyone can know, the object is to understand. And
Mhm.
that's really what I think the RCP Institute does is it creates an environment where you can understand what's really happening and get to a new level of awareness of what's really happening inside the body.
Yeah, because you're brought to the other side of the definition of insanity. If what we're doing isn't working, then we're going to have to change something because we can't just keep repeating what I feel like is being done in allopathic and naturopathic care is just
Right,
repeating the same process, hoping that we're going to come up with a different answer, helping people with anemia by giving them more iron when the problem is
right,
actually that they have loads of iron. It's just stuck. And that whole concept, of course, doesn't make sense when you're looking at a hemoglobin level that's been low someone's whole life. And yet we're able to look at these other in a different light, looking at a full iron panel and viewing
right.
ferritin completely differently than anyone else in the world, honestly, that I know of, because it's always been the focus of we need this excess stored iron as ferritin in order to have this bank to draw from. And that is
Right.
how I was taught. But it never made any sense to me. Why is the body putting everything into this ferritin category or draining it dry? Either one, what, and people are still not feeling any better. They still have all the symptoms of
No,
anemia. And that's where it begs the question of what are we missing? What do we not know? And I think that that's a huge piece of this. The root cause protocol is the connection to where is the iron coming from? Well,
right, right.
there's metal filings in our food supply since 1941 or earlier. So we can talk about the earth having 32% iron in the core. Like we're actually able to get that everywhere. It's the fact that we don't need as much as we've been told, which is, I think, probably one of the biggest deceptions is why is that narrative there? Why do you think that all of the research that you share in your course and that I have literally dug deep into, because to be honest, I didn't want to upset the way I was doing things. It was
Oh,
working
I
just
don't got it. Yeah,
but having that information available going, I sat there literally through weeks of thinking, it's right here. Like it's right here in published medical journals. It's here. It's not like this is information that's new and trending. It's ancient, but we're just now
just
realizing that it's there. Is that because it's hidden? Or I guess that's a big question. But
well, it's just not taught. And I think that's the hard part is for people to realize that these prestigious universities have a Chinese wall that separates clinical education from research. And the research produces articles. They're really sophisticated articles. It's just that isn't taught in the classroom. And there's a narrative. There's a very well scripted narrative. And the whole concept of medical disease is a farce. I mean, one of my absolute favorite movies um, of all time is The Wizard of Oz. I just love that movie. And we have a theater here in Chapel Hill that is I guess they've got 13 different auditoriums. And every year they do have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz on a full screen?
Yeah.
It's a complete, it's a completely different experience. And the movie or the book originally, and then the movie was originally about how to end the Federal Reserve System. That's really what that story is about. The Tin Man is the tax ID number. That's where the Tin Man comes
Oh,
from.
wow.
Yeah, the scarecrow is it's just a fictitious entity that exists in this Federal Reserve System. I don't want to get lost in that. But the point is, that movie very easily can be created to define what's wrong with the conventional medical system. So we have a talking head. Who's the talking head? That's your doctor. You know, and we're supposed to be afraid of that talking head. And one of the most important scenes in the movie is when Toto pulls back the green curtain. Green is very important. When physicians earn their medical degree, they have their robe has 3 green stripes. Did you know that? So green is the color for medicine. Every field of study has a different color, but green is medicine.
Interesting how that corresponds with dollars, right?
Exactly, right? But but Toto pulls back the curtain to expose that the snake oil salesman is pulling all the levers. So
Mm.
who's Toto? That's me. I'm pulling back the curtain. How do we spell curtain? CU hyphen. So we see the symbol for copper. And the most important part of the story is when the wicked witch lights Scarecrow on fire, right? Well, what does the wicked witch represent? She's iron. She's all dressed in black. She's a wicked person, right? And what does if you've ever seen it on a big screen, I would encourage people to look at it. Dorothy grabs a bucket. It's easily 2.5 feet high. And what's it made of? Copper. So she's grabbing this bucket,
Wow.
copper, water to put out the iron fire. And it's
Wow.
like, when I saw that the first time, it was 3 years ago, I literally jumped up in the theater. I went, oh my gosh. Because when you're watching it on a TV, the bucket is about this big, but you see it on the screen, and it's huge. I went, oh my God. So it's just, and I'm sure people think, oh brother, this guy is just he's lost it. But I think that we can learn so much from that kind of symbolism to realize that it doesn't need to be complicated. It really doesn't. And we're trained to believe that it is complicated. But I think the most important part of the story is that the Greek word for pharmaceutical is pharmacopoeia. And what does pharmacopoeia mean when you translate it? Witchcraft. And so the whole field of pharmaceuticals and drug based intervention is all based on a narrative of witchcraft, getting people to believe that they're sick, that they have some medical disease, when in fact, what they really have is low energy because they don't have enough minerals and nutrients to keep the water wheel moving to release the energy to stay in balance. And the other image is to the boogie board that people use, especially if they're going skiing. But the concept of a boogie board is if you're on one side or the other, it takes no energy to do that. But if you're going to stay on the boogie board, it takes a lot of energy in your legs and throughout your body to stay in balance. And that's the key. You got to have energy for homeostasis. And I don't think they're outside of a few really gifted scientists, George Wall. Is it George Wall? I'm blanking on his name right now. But the concept of cellular energy deficiency is a really critical concept for practitioners to understand that it's the energy production that's so incredibly important. And so that's what leads us to use the phrase ignore the enemies and ignite the energy. That's really what we're trying to do with the protocol. Ignite the energy production in the body. And I don't know, it seems to be helping a lot of people along the way.
Well, and the concept that we need to strengthen the host instead of attacking the guest, where we chase candida, we chase all these different pathogens, viruses, funguses, all these things. And I do believe that that happens in a body that isn't in balance. But again, that's taking care of the seat instead of strengthening the mechanism at which our body actually is able to regulate those things on its own. And the idea that we do have an innate ability to heal. Excuse me, I haven't been talking as much as you, Morley, and I'm still choked up. But the fact that, you hear a lot of other practitioners, and I've been in other programs where they talk about cellular healing, and there's this big focus on you have to heal the cell to get well. And 100%, I agree with that. But I think the ability to do that lies within us in the mechanisms working properly because we are correcting deficiencies like vitamin A, magnesium, and copper. Really, this trilogy of these things are actually the power inside the cell. And we can throw things at all the different symptoms and maybe even hijack the system, like with vitamin D, for example. I think people often, or zinc, they say, I feel so much better, if I'm sick when I updose D or zinc. And I think that is true because the body is amazing. And if you give it a huge amount of something that's recognizable somewhat, it's going to be able to make use of it on some level, but the cost is lowering the other, the copper, which is definitely what's going to give you long-term immunity. So that's some hard stuff because it's definitely, you think, well, why do people feel better when they do these things? Why do they feel better sometimes when they take iron? Because the system can hijack something, but what it cost us on the mineral side is huge. And we can't keep doing that.
No, I think people need to take the long view. And I think the tragedy in modern medicine is it's focusing on treating symptoms, not correcting underlying physiology. Everything's about symptom relief. Oh, I got a headache. Please make it go away. Well, why do you have a headache? My vitamin D is low. Why is your vitamin D low? People don't stop, and the practitioners are guilty of it as well. The question why is not being asked enough in medicine. Why are these metabolic markers, biological markers, why are they out of regulation? And what surprised me was everything vectored back to this three-ring circus between copper and oxygen and iron. I would never have thought that. And it took years and years of reading, but reflection and just really allowing the intuitive process to unfold and realize, oh my gosh, that is the mechanism. And then begin to stress test that model with the research. It isn't like we've read one article, it's like, oh yeah, this is the answer. It's like, my goodness, I've read 10,000 articles. And it's, not that I can cite chapter and verse with every article, but for whatever reason, I'm knock on wood, I'm pretty good at remembering stuff. And I want to make sure that people know the person I was thinking of was Douglas Wallace. He's an amazing biologist and geneticist at Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. He's the individual who came up with the concept of cellular energy deficiency is not understood by conventional practitioners. It's in his 2005 article, which is an amazing article. But the thing is, it's um, it's unsettling to buck the system. Most people don't. Most people just want to go along. They don't want to. They don't want to create stress for themselves or for their field or whatever. And I was raised in a very stressful environment, and for whatever reason, was never afraid to challenge the status quo. Just never did it. Never hesitated to do it. And but I've also felt guided. I mean, heavily guided along the way. Very grateful for that guidance. And um, I'm amazed. Like one of the comments you made about the different supplements and things. I think the part that people don't realize is it seems like just about every um, mineral or nutrient that we recommend as a stop, every heavy metal you've ever heard of, cadmium or mercury or aluminum or whatever, all of these bad guys, cyanide, things like that, that are really toxic to our body, they're all vectoring in on the exact same mechanism of the mitochondria, complex 4. And cytochrome C oxidase, if it can't turn oxygen into water, it creates what's called oxidative stress, which then creates this wheelhouse of dysfunction. And people love to talk about metabolic or mitochondrial dysfunction. In fact, I heard a video recently with Secretary Kennedy talking about the fact that diabetes is caused by mitochondrial dysfunction. Well, I'd like to pick at that, say, what is it? I really want to understand what he knows about mitochondrial dysfunction. Or is it just a platitude that he learned from Casey Means, who's very well intentioned, very well educated, but does she understand what mitochondrial dysfunction is as it relates to the water wheel versus the Ferris wheel? What I've learned over the years is it really takes about 5 minutes to train someone from the public about how the body works. It takes about 5 months to train a practitioner. And it would take 5 years to try to change big pharma to get them to realize what the problem is. Well, there's no incentive for them to learn the truth because they're making hand over fist, they're making so much money because they're treating the symptom, not the underlying lack of energy that's getting out of control to create all of the chaos.
Well, it makes sense, I think, looking at it from a perspective like that. But again, that perspective isn't something that's being taught. So it's very valuable. I think the information that's here and a paradigm shift completely that it's so needed. I mean, our whole system is propped up on matchsticks. I mean, everything, from the pharmaceutical industry to what happens to our copper. So the theory that in the root cause protocol, or the very well researched belief, is that this is actually, there's iron dysregulation. So when someone presents with anemia, that there's a very big difference between iron in the blood and iron in the tissue. And this stuck iron is really what we're talking about being so toxic. I mean, we do need iron, but nowhere near the amount that we have availability of. No. How would you explain that to someone who all their life has said, look, my ferritin's been, 15, and I have had hemoglobin as low as 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And there's no way you're going to convince me that I wasn't anemic, meaning no iron in the blood as far as that test goes. But can you kind of talk about why is that understanding there, and how is it not actually how the system works?
Great question. And I think we have to start with an understanding that a blood test isn't 100% accurate. We've been trained to believe it's the perfect window into the body's physiology, when in fact it's just what's going on in the blood. And the real shift for me intellectually and philosophically was the research of Bruce Ames and David Kalilia back in 2004 and 2005, where they were studying this dichotomy between iron in the blood versus iron in the tissue. And they came to realize that there's 10 times more iron, there can be 10 times more iron in the tissue than shows up in the blood. I'm like, well, that's a big number. Let's begin to work with that. And so then you begin to realize that there's been a lot of controversy around the declaration of anemia. It really goes back the original research that proved that anemia exists was done after the First World War. Pregnant women. Like, what? Because at any given time, 1% of society is pregnant. 1%. And the part that's very cleverly hidden is the concept of hemodilution, that hemoglobin levels drop as the pregnancy progresses. You get first 20 weeks, it's like the woman's not pregnant. The hemoglobin's very strong, but then it starts to decline. And this is well documented. Myra Fields, Philip Steer. I mean, there's some big names behind that whole process, but it's not taught, because it kills the narrative. And what happened was back in the First World War, they were able to prove that pregnant women became, quote, anemic using non-pregnancy values. And the hemodilution was clearly taking place. And so they took control of the narrative at that point. But the fascinating part of it was they inoculated the other 99%, even though it was based on the 1%. And so, again, we're back to pharmacopoeia, witchcraft, very cleverly disguised. And the world started to believe in this concept of iron deficiency. And then you alluded to the time frame of 1941, the Second World War. That's when they started adding iron filings to wheat in the UK, Canada, and the US. And we're not making it up. It's documented in a wonderful book by iron toxicologist Jim Moon. And the book was written in 2008. And he very, very well documents that event. And I don't think the world's ever been the same since 1941, since they started adding iron filings. And what does the body do to iron? It starts to rust. It's not a really complicated process, because there's a lot of water in our body, there's a lot of oxygen in our body. And we know what happens with iron on the outside of the body, what's happening on the inside too. And I think getting people to realize that first, the blood test may not be completely accurate is an important milestone. But then get people to realize that there are three ways to measure iron. One is the hemoglobin, which is it's a bucket of iron. So when you take hemoglobin and myoglobin, which are basically waiters carrying oxygen, that's 80% of the iron in the body. It's an enormous bolus of iron. And then another marker would be a teacup of iron. It's called ferritin. And teacup is much smaller than a bucket, right? It's very, very different size. And so you've got 80% iron in the bucket, maybe 10% of iron in the teacup. But the key is ferritin is not supposed to be in the blood. It's supposed to be in the tissue inside the cell. And again, that's not our assertion. That's famous iron biologists like Douglas Kell or Orozio or Weiss or Harrison. I mean, there's some big names behind that. And Warwood is another big one. Jacobs. I mean, there's some really big names. These are famous iron biologists and hematologists. Ferritin's not supposed to be in the blood, but it's been hijacked. The concept has been hijacked now. And um, we were just in England giving some talks. And on the second night, there was a bunch of practitioners in the audience. So I wanted to have some fun with them. I said, so how many of you have patients who have low ferritin? About half the hands went up. I said, great. I said, it's a real problem, right? And they, oh yeah, it's a real problem. I said, how many of you are measuring the hepcidin levels of your patients? Well, you could have heard a pin drop. Mm-hmm. They'd never heard of it. And what people need to understand is that ferritin and hepcidin ride on a seesaw. And when ferritin is down, hepcidin is up, and vice versa. And in pregnancy, what people hate it when I say this, but it's true. What is the fetus? It's a parasite. And what's really high when you have a parasite is your hepcidin level. And what's really low when you have a parasite? Ferritin. And so low ferritin just means you've got parasites. And what does parasites mean? It means you're copper deficient. And that's the world of animal husbandry. These brilliant animal farmers know that if the animal has parasite, give it more copper. The last thing you want to do is give an animal that has parasites iron, but doctors do it all the time. So we have this confusion about hemoglobin, the bucket, ferritin is the teacup, but it shouldn't be showing up in the blood. And when it does, you know that you have inflammation, especially when it's high ferritin. That's well accepted. High ferritin is a sign of inflammation. The liver's not working right. But the part that people don't realize is, why is it getting into the blood? Because the lysosome of the macrophage is trying to recycle the iron, can't complete the cycle, and it cleaves amino acids off the ferritin. The iron gets dumped into the lysosome of the cell, and then the protein, the abridged protein, gets secreted into the blood, and it's empty shotgun shells. It's not a sign of iron vitality. It's as Dr. Douglas Kell says, it's a sign of organ pathophysiology. So that's ferritin, and then we get to serum iron, which is it's a tiny, it's 1/10 of 1% of the iron in the body is in the blood, and it's supposed to be bound to a protein called transferrin. Very, very important transport protein. But what's happening in modern society is that the iron is building, and there's something called non-transferrin bound iron, NTBI, because the body can't make enough transferrin to keep up with the iron that's in the diet, in the supplementation, in the fortification, in the iron. I don't call them infusions anymore. It's iron invasions. And the average person doesn't know all this. And so, or the average practitioner as well. And so there's a misunderstanding about what low iron means, that it's very nuanced, and that the part that's unsettling to learn is that you can't make heme without copper. You can't make hemoglobin without copper. You can't really mature a red blood cell. The word mature is, we think we know what it means, but it means that it's really allowing the body to have the highest expression of that entity. You know, and red blood cells get matured, hormones get matured, the proteins throughout the body get matured. What's involved in maturing all of these elements? Copper. In every instance, copper is the maturing agent. It's taking place inside the endoplasmic reticulum that some people may have heard of, but the maturation process is really, really important. You can't recycle iron without copper. I mean, it's just on every level. And so the observations that I've made is that I'm not sure practitioners know how energy is made. I really don't think they know the true mechanics of energy production. I don't think practitioners know how blood is made. I don't think they know how bone is made. And I don't think they know how babies are made. And that's a very bold assertion. But why do I say that? Because all of those events, those physiological events, all require bioavailable copper. And we can cite chapter and verse across the board. And the word copper does not appear in the classroom. It doesn't matter what training program you're in, whether it's nutritional training all the way up to the most sophisticated doctors, they don't use the word copper. And it's treated, as you noted earlier, as a toxin. And so I think if the public can begin to embrace this idea that there is more to the story, that go watch The Wizard of Oz if you can, watch that story with fresh eyes, and see it in a completely different light, and realize that there's an elegance and a sophistication to how our physiology works that's based on this metal that's supposed to be a toxin. And the point that I made earlier, before we started the conversation, is that here's a classic example of the misunderstanding in conventional circles. I stumbled into a new protein I'd never heard of, and it's called uromodulin, uromodulin. I'd never heard of it. It's the most prevalent protein in the blood, more than albumin. I didn't think that was possible. More than transferrin. The scale of it is unbelievable. And it's made principally in what's called the loop of Henle, which are tubule cells of the kidney. And the cells are called TAL, thick ascending limb. It's amazing what they'll do with the terminology, but these cells make this uromodulin. And why is it important? It turns out that, based on just some very rough estimates yesterday, 200 million Americans suffer from some form of kidney disease at some point in their life. 2/3 of the country has to deal with urinary tract infections, kidney stones, salt-sensitive hypertension, or worse yet, chronic kidney disease. 200 million Americans. Well, what does uromodulin do? Uromodulin, and this is not me building or interpreting or stretching. It is clearly stated in the research that uromodulin prevents urinary tract infections. Uromodulin prevents kidney stones. Uromodulin prevents salt-sensitive hypertension, and uromodulin regulates and prevents chronic kidney disease. The size of it is so enormous. It's like it's so big we can't comprehend it. So what do we do when we're in a situation like that? Ignore it. It
And
can't be that.
that is copper dependent, right, Morley? That uromodulin.
Absolutely.
So
and it's copper dependent in the sense that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say that what's really critical is if oxidative stress builds, if this constant struggle between copper and iron and oxygen isn't going well, if it's out of sync, which it often is, and if you have stress in your world, you're going to have oxidative stress in your body. And if that oxidative stress is not checked by copper-dependent enzymes, that oxidative stress is going to shut down uromodulin. Wah, wah, wah. Sorry, you got a UTI. And guess what the go-to standard of care is to treat a urinary tract infection is an antibiotic called ciprofloxacin, which is fluoride activated. And what does it do? It sucks copper out of the tissue faster than you can say boo. And people get tendon tears and all sorts of problems from the loss of copper in their body from the antibiotic that was recommended by the doctor who doesn't understand how UTIs happen. And so it's just, again, this whole orchestration of the narrative versus an understanding of the physiology. And so it's what we really strive, as you well know now, what we strive to do in the RCP is pull back the curtain. Let's really see what's really happening. Let's understand what these wheels are, these levers, and what's the mechanism of action that's enabling these symptoms to occur. And at the base of every one of the mechanisms is lack of energy. Well, let's solve that problem. Let's turn these Ferris wheels back into water wheels and let the body figure it out. And one of the things that I learned in 2020, when we were all in a state of shock in February and March of that year, I was getting white hot because it was just like, this doesn't make any sense at all. And I started to dig into the research, and I found 52 articles that clearly documented and demonstrate that bioavailable copper ran the immune system. 52. I stopped at 52. I'm not sure why I stopped, but I did. I was got tired of beating a dead horse. And what was the one word that no one was using in 2020? Copper. And what was the cocktail that everyone was taking? The COVID cocktail was high dose ascorbic acid, high dose vitamin D, and high dose zinc. And the average person doesn't understand that that's the triad. Those three nutrients work synergistically to kill the bioavailability of copper in the body. So then what we're doing is we're totally destroying the symmetry of the three-ring circus. And then the iron and the oxygen gets out of control. And then you've got all sorts of symptoms to follow. So it's just the key is getting people to suspend their belief system a little bit, open up their mind like the parachute that saved me from hitting Earth at too great a speed, but open their mind and say, is there more to the story? And as you went through this mental process and that 2 week period where you, as you say, didn't like you very much, but the most important thing is you stayed with it. You hung in there and you came to realize, oh my gosh, there's more to the story. And I think more people need to go through that and be willing to question the narrative. Because I think what happened in 2020 is we realized there is a narrative. If you're really open-minded about it, you came to a new realization of just how narrative-driven we are as a society. And I think people are waking up. More and more people are waking up to that.
Right.
And I think the opportunity to get people to realize that this concept of health, homeostasis, the concept of the water wheel is very attainable, but you have to completely rethink the cast of characters and be willing to rethink, as you said, how the body really works, how it really responds to stress. And that's really that's the whole cornerstone. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, I know you kind of had an acronym for COVID during one of our sessions in the training, which was copper vanished and iron dysregulated, which I thought was genius in the fact that everyone said that ivermectin was being used as, and I know that's controversial, but it was helpful that it was being used off label. But when you think about it in this perspective, what it said to me was it wasn't off label at all. Ivermectin sequesters iron. So it gave the body in my opinion, a reprieve where copper was very low. It had disappeared. And so iron had took such a prominent role that it was just literally robbing oxygen. So ivermectin was able to basically give a reprieve just where the copper actually could be able to find some sort of balance again. I haven't heard anyone, actually exclusively say this is how it was, but when I listened to you talk about the copper displacement and then iron regulation and what happened during that time, I thought it made perfect sense that in a pinch, ivermectin could be used to do what it actually does to kill parasites, which is remove the iron that is the
Mhm.
source of food for all pathogens, and which is why I think ultimately, America's so sick is that we have so much iron stuck in the tissue. It's not available due to these missing cofactors. And
Mhm.
here we sit with it just building and building. So what are we seeing more and more of? You have more candida overgrowth, you have more parasite
Mhm.
connections, all of these things because the body, due to the copper, deficiency, is not able to regulate the innate immune system as well. Do you feel like that's some of what's happening, Morley, as far as why we're now seeing things that you're constantly chasing the pathogens and not strengthening the host, and that iron is actually a huge food source for cancer, viruses, funguses, bacteria?
Well, it's interesting. What really led to the trip overseas was talking with a very well-educated nutritionist. Um, it's a very impressive program. I'm not going to identify her or the program per se, but she sought me out. She was in a similar situation as you. She had a practice, very, very thriving practice, treating anemia, don't you know? And many of her clients had low ferritin. They were taking iron and they were feeling worse.
Mm-hmm.
And her son, on top of that, according to the air test, was copper toxic. So it was an opportunity, and she said something's wrong. I'm not understanding something, and she tracked me down, and we had a lovely conversation. And I'm a sucker for a British accent, but I asked her. I said, "What was the textbook that you used?" She said, I can't remember the title of it. But she says right here. I said, I want you to look it up. I want you to look up the word ceruloplasmin, which is the copper protein that we spend so much time talking about and studying. And it's the copper protein that I think pretty much runs the body. That's a very uncomfortable concept. And I said, look it up in the index. Nothing. Zip. Nada about ceruloplasmin, which didn't surprise me. I said, okay. I said, let's look up the phrase natural, excuse me, nutritional immunity. And that's a phrase that many people may not be familiar with, but it was coined by Ed Weinberg, who was an iron biologist at Indiana University. And I think it was back in the 50s when he came up with this realization. But the basis of it is you do not feed iron to people who have pathogens. You just don't do it. Why would you willingly, knowingly give iron to an organism that has pathogens? We've had pathogens in our body. It's, we're on a planet that has a lot of oxygen, a lot of iron, and it's going to have pathogens. So nutritional immunity is taboo, and there was no mention of nutritional immunity in that textbook. I was in shock, and that's been sort of expunged from the record now. And so what people need to realize is that there's been some amazing research done that goes back to the early 1900s, literally, like 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, that where they were really trying to understand how does the body work. But everything flipped around 1984, wink, wink, and it's just we've never been the same. And I think the whole narrative changed, the whole profit incentive changed, and we became the um, unfortunate recipients of a lot of narrative induced medication that was destabilizing our immune system, was creating dyshomeostasis. And again, we didn't know that because the farming system had changed, the food processing system had changed, pharmaceuticals changed. When you start to fluoride activate things, changes the whole biochemistry of the body. And so again, it's just being able to piece together these elements and realize that there is this Achilles heel in our body, and the Achilles heel is this bioavailable copper, and getting people to appreciate the significance of that, and realize that it can be that simple, that it can be that straightforward, and it's enormously important as we talk about it in the training, but most people don't know that, and so they've not been exposed to this counterintuitive material. I mean, it's just not part of their lexicon.
Well, and I think too, Morley, because I know I need to wrap up. I've used a tremendous amount of your time and I'm very thankful to have this opportunity. But the stress connection, if I wanted the audience to understand, well, okay, we've got all this overload of iron. We have copper deficiency, and that's actually the missing link. Where is the copper going? Are there certain things that are depleting that because we have tons of sources of iron coming in? Do you feel like it's through glyphosate, through the deconstruction of copper or the deficiency that's created? It's a billion times faster. Is that correct, Morley? That's what I've found in the research that is pretty limited, but that the herbicide Roundup or glyphosate can actually dismantle copper within the cell a billion times faster. That's
Mhm.
how do you even get your mind around that alone? And so do you feel like it's this culmination of high doses of D, high doses of zinc, stress, environmental factors? I mean, where do you think we're having such a difficulty getting copper?
That's a great question. Um, my process started with kind of debunking the system.
Mhm.
And like I started with heart disease, what's really causing heart disease. And when I got to 36 different things that were wrong, I realized this. I said, wait a minute, the whole system's wrong. What's right? And and then, of course, by the grace of God, I get introduced to Michael Greenberg, who says, focus on what's enduring, not what's new. And so that was a very important realization. But I think people need to be aware of the fact that the farming system has changed, that the food processing system has changed over the course of a century, and that pharmaceuticals have changed over that same 100 years. And I know I sound like a first-class conspiracist, but it's not a conspiracy if I can prove it. And I can prove that copper has been in the crosshairs for a century, very well documented. It's not well known, it's just you have to know the literature. But people like Leslie Clave would encourage people to look up the research of Leslie, Lesley, Clave, Klevay. And he's a cardiologist and copper expert. And he's been quietly researching. He's now 91 years old.
Oh, wow.
And he's continuing to do his research. But he wrote a very important article in 2022 on chronic copper deficiency.
Mhm.
And it's not a long article. Dr. Clave can say more in 4 sentences than most people can say in 4 paragraphs. And it's a very well constructed, thoughtful, well documented in terms of footnotes to challenge this narrative that copper is toxic. And And he's well aware of the iron side of the story. He doesn't talk about it a lot. He really wants people to understand that these problems can be solved with copper. And so one of his cornerstone insights is that, as a cardiologist, he wanted to understand, does copper deficiency cause heart disease? It's a great question. Mm-hmm. And so he's documented, codified, proven that there's 80 anatomical, chemical, and physiological defects in a copper deficient heart. Well, basically what he's done is he's blown up the field of cardiology because it's all based on lack of copper. And when copper's down, iron's up. And then we can flip from Dr. Clave to the research of Jerry Sullivan, famous pathologist from University of Florida in Gainesville, MD, PhD. And he's the guy that created what's called the iron heart hypothesis. He's the guy that figured out why women outlive men. Because women have 40 years of blood loss, that means iron loss, which lowers the ability to store it in the tissue. And as soon as a woman goes into perimenopause and then menopause, they become men and they accumulate iron at a very fast rate, and they don't have the infrastructure, the physiology to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And how many gynecologists are trained in the importance of phlebotomy? None. They don't know that phlebotomy is what keeps a woman young for 40 years and then can continue to do that in those menopausal years. But the thing is, it's the challenge is getting people to realize that just balancing these two metals can make that big a difference in the body, and getting people to be willing to suspend their narrative-based infrastructure of knowledge and say, gosh, maybe there's missing pieces of the puzzle. And so it's getting people to embrace a whole new way of thinking and realize that the body is not stupid. The body is incredibly intelligent. And if we had the opportunity in maybe a subsequent conversation, just to talk about the elegance of ceruloplasmin. Mm-hmm. And now this cousin called uromodulin. Wow. We could talk for a couple hours on that alone.
Hey, I'm gonna take you up on that sometime.
That's right. No, that's great. I look forward to it. But it's getting the public to realize that we have this innate wisdom. Back to Dr. Liz, she talked about the innate healer, the innate wisdom of the body, and I'd never known that terminology. But that's what really drove the title and the whole focus of this book. Cure Your Fatigue. Yeah. Was this funky little whoopsie, go around the right way, that little CU, that's what runs the body. And it's a very disruptive thought that this element that's supposedly a toxin is in fact the brains of the outfit. It's the intelligence, it's the innate intelligence, and it works through these elegant proteins and peptides and enzymes that nobody talks about. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing the mental gap that exists in practitioner land, that people don't know the enzymes. They don't know the metabolic pathways. They don't know how to answer the question, why? Why is the iron low? Why is the vitamin D low? Why is why is homocysteine rising in my body?
Because we would rather to share what you shared, that people would rather believe a simple lie than a complex truth.
Well, that's just it. And I think it's nobody likes to be hoodwinked. No one likes to think that they've been snookered, right? and the thing is, when you get into the research and you find out the orders of magnitude of impact that happened through this manipulation of the farming, food processing, pharmaceutical system, you start to get into really big numbers. And as a friend of mine said, Morley, there are only three numbers. There's one, two, and a lot. And when you start to talk about, 100 trillion cells in the human body, or you start talking about 40 quadrillion mitochondria, or you start talking about the speed of copper chelation by glyphosate, it's a billion times faster. What happens is these numbers go right over people's head. They don't understand it. And the default response to something you don't understand is, it can't be important. If I don't understand it, it can't be important. And so people have dismissed that knowledge because they don't understand, what does 40 quadrillion water wheels mean? It's a really big deal, right? And keeping them all pumping out water as opposed to pumping out Ferris wheels. That's like, and this idea that the body has this natural, innate ability to keep track of all this stuff. It's I get reverential about it because I think copper is our connection back to source. And copper has a magnetic attraction to sunlight. That's a big deal. And what did all of the early churches have? They had a hole. Every church that was built in the beginning of Christianity had a hole in the ceiling. Why? To let the light in. And it's so foundational. And we don't know that. Didn't know that. Oh, churches had a hole. Wow, that's interesting. And we don't know that copper has a magnetic attraction to ammonia. Let's think about that. So copper has an attraction to light and to ammonia. What does that mean? Well, that's the beginning and end of life. Where does life start on the planet? It's called photosynthesis, right? It's a really basic concept. A lot of people talk about it. They don't talk about it properly because they never talk about copper. And so you can Google it, or your followers can Google it. Google the term Rubisco. And it's the most Rubisco, and it stands for ribosomal ribosyl diphosphate decarboxylase. Very stuffy term. And what does that enzyme do? It's what splits the carbon from the oxygen in carbon dioxide. And the oxygen goes out to feed the humans and the mammals, and the carbon goes into the sugars being made by the plant. That enzyme is copper dependent. Rubisco is copper dependent. It's the most prevalent enzyme on planet Earth. You can Google it, Rubisco, and it's stunning how important it is. And who's talking about it? Nobody, because it blows up the narrative that copper is toxic. How could copper be a toxin if it's splitting carbon from oxygen so that we can breathe oxygen to activate the oxygen to become water to release the energy so we can stay in homeostasis? Help me understand how that's toxic. I mean, it's just the whole basis of it makes no sense at all. And that's what people don't take the time to sit with the problem. And that's another one of my favorite sayings from Einstein. And I'm not that smart. I'm no genius. I just stayed with the problem longer. And I think that inspired me. I said, gotta stay with this problem. And the problem is we're stuck in a narrative. I mean, the movie The Matrix was not a movie, it was a documentary. So we're stuck in this narrative, and we can break free, but we've got to change our thinking, which is what you've done through the RCP Institute. And you've embraced it with a zeal that is impressive given your prior training. And I think people need to understand, I hope people appreciate the courage it took for you, kind of like the cowardly lion, right? To make that change in your whole mental model. That is not an easy thing to do. And so I'm delighted to have the chance to have this initial conversation. And I think it would be fun to continue the dialogue. Maybe even talk about some of your case studies. That would be fun to take a couple of your clients that you're most intrigued by and just talk about what are the dynamics. We don't have to talk about names, but just get people to realize that the truth is revealed in the testing if you have fresh eyes. And
Yeah.
and you have to have the right perspective and lens to see what's really going on here, which I think is exciting for people to have that opportunity.
Well, and I think kind of in closing, Morley, you have a statement that I think is very profound. There's several actually, but that we have been misfed and misled. And
Mhm.
no one really wants to feel like they have been snookered.
No, no,
And
they
so,
don't.
but if you don't want to continue in a narrative that makes no sense to continue, we do have to challenge ourselves to think about this differently, to look at our health through a different lens. Because if we don't, we're going to end up with the same outcomes that we have now, which is a rise in disease, more medications to dismantle the mechanisms in our body that would normally keep us healthy. And I do think there's a narrative. I hope it changes because it's a little bit disheartening to kind of see the weight of all of that. And I think I always try to present that there are things that we can do. Yes, this is not a great situation that we found ourselves in our health or even in our world. But there's always hope. There's always an opportunity to say, wait a minute, this isn't working. So let's look at this and try to make it work differently and honestly understand how we work, which I think is the key to all of this, is that we are never going to outsmart our bodies because they are definitely fearfully and wonderfully made. And the conversation, Morley, I know I want everyone to know that they can go to your website, which is
Mhm.
rootcauseprotocol.com. Tons of free information on there. That's honestly being candid. I heard you interviewed on a podcast back a while ago, and I was intrigued, and so I waited a while. I went on your website, and I'm a cynic at heart because when you've done program after program, I thought, what's this guy selling? That was literally like, what? Let's see what this
Sure.
newest thing is. And having come out of programs that cost thousands upon thousands of dollars and finding at the end of it, it was just the same jargon that was just packaged differently. And so I went on your website and I looked and I thought, that says Root Cause Protocol Handbook. That's downloadable. That's free. And I thought, this guy's giving this information away. Like, what is going on with that? And I actually had to kind of dig a little bit and see, can I learn from you? Like I was so once I looked at your blog post and I actually did follow those multitude of links that you give to research article after research article, I was just so thankful that you're sharing information that anyone could come alongside and say, what's wrong with my health? Your book, Cure Your Fatigue. I read that book literally with my mouth open most of the time, going, what this makes total sense, but it's going to turn everything upside down. And that book, I highly recommend. I recommend it in practice because it's so much more than fatigue. It is definitely an issue. And I think so many people are so tired and they're tired of feeling tired. And to know that there's an answer that you could actually feel better and it's not as complicated to, as a solution as we
No.
would think. And your root cause protocol handbook, I would encourage anyone just to look at that information. It's very well done. And it's something that they can do when they finish the podcast. Go over there and check out
Right.
all this information that seems so crazy
Right.
initially. But I appreciate the work that you've done and that you have an obsession with copper and ceruloplasmin and iron dysregulation, which I honestly think is going to help so many people.
No, I appreciate that. Very, very well said. And appreciate your support. It means the world to have switched on people like you beating this drum, and more. We've trained over 1,000 people now since 2017, and that's just a drop in the bucket. But the momentum is building. There's more and more people who are aware of this protocol. It's not a household word. I'm not. I don't have the visibility that um, maybe people would hope I would have. But I think the early adopters and the innovators, that there's a bell-shaped curve for knowledge adoption. And the innovators and early adopters are always on the cutting edge. Those people, I think, we've penetrated that market. A lot of really sharp people are aware of it, whether they're doing it or not. That's debatable. But then you get into late adopters, and then you get into laggards. That's where the bulk of society is: late adopters and laggards. And so it's a tougher road to hoe because there's a very small percentage of people who are in the front end of the learning curve. The big bulk of people are in the latter stages of adoption. And it's a constant drumbeat getting people to hear this message again and again and again. And there are people who are realizing that this message is not going away. Mm-hmm. And this idea that maybe this concept of anemia isn't real. It isn't all that it's been cracked up to be. And I was recently talking with a UK-based physician. He was a trauma surgeon. And I made the assertion, I said, there's no anemia on the planet unless you've been in a car accident. And he went, what? I mean, he was just, and he took a minute. He said, actually, I think he's right. I mean, he was able to kind of go through his training and look at it very quickly, look at it from a completely different perspective once he understood the copper iron dynamic, the general versus the foot soldier. And he went, this guy's onto something. It was a light bulb moment. And so it's just getting people like that. His name is Doc Malik, Malik. If you want to look up that podcast, we've actually had two conversations now. One on Zoom, like we're having, but then when we were in England, we had a chance to do it face to face, which was, in his term, epic. But it was really fun. He refers to me as a global treasure for humanity. I'm like, you're very kind. But I think it's just getting more people to accept that there is an alternative. There's a new way of looking at it, and it's not unlike a kaleidoscope where you can just take a little twist of the kaleidoscope and a completely different picture emerges. And that's really what we're trying to do, is just a slight twist of understanding these minerals and these metabolic factors and these nutrients that are so central to normal physiology, healthy homeostasis. And once the calibration is right, man, the body sings. It knows what to do because there is a blueprint. I think that's what people don't realize, is there really is a blueprint to our immune system, to our energy production pathways, and it's being violated regularly by the farming, food processing, and pharmaceutical system. But once you feed the right nutrients to that blueprint, boy, it really comes to life. And so it's just allowing people the opportunity to be aware of that. That's what this conversation will do for your community, for your practice, for the people that will be aware of this conversation. It's going to begin to stimulate a whole new line of thinking.
Well, thank you, Morley, and I will definitely reach out about hopefully a second conversation. I would love to dive more into ceruloplasmin. And I just want to give everyone an idea of this conversation. It's so in depth that I could interview you for days and hours, and I think I would probably be like, wow, that's something now. Let's talk about that. But thank you again so much. And we will add the links to your website and also to the book, Cure Your Fatigue, so that the audience can look you up and dig into this for themselves like I did and see what they think about it.
That's great. Well, I appreciate that. And Mike, I'll make sure that there's a QR code
Okay.
And I think I can share with you. So we've got the first edition of the book, which is doing well. Thank you very much. But publisher has decided to make a second edition because they think they can really increase the awareness of this movement. But the QR code will allow people to read. I think it's like the first 20 pages of the second edition, and
Okay.
they might enjoy that as well. So I'll make sure that that gets to you so that you can share that on your video links and things like that.
Thank you so much, Morley. Well, I'll let you get on with your day. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. You take care.
Thank you so much for listening. If this podcast inspired you or encouraged you in some way, please leave us a review or share this episode with a friend. If you need help connecting the dots of your own health journey, I would love to help you with that. You can reach me via the link below to set up a one-on-one consultation. You can also connect with us by joining our free Facebook community, which is linked below, or at healthywithhappyspurling.com. Until next time.